Imagine this for a second. You work hard for years, through struggle after struggle, finally buying yourself a dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. And in your backyard sits the crown jewel, a sparkling blue swimming pool that you built, that you paid for, and that you treat like your personal sanctuary. But then, out of nowhere, your neighbor, and HOA Karen, tells you that you have to hand it over for her party. And when you refuse, she calls the cops on you. That's the story of Marcus Hill, and what he did in response. It shook the entire neighborhood. It was a Saturday morning in early July, the kind of summer morning where the heat rises before the clock even strikes 9. Cicadas buzzed from the trees like a never-ending hum. Kids were already biking down the cul-de-sac with sticky popsicles dripping down their hands, and the faint smell of fresh-cut grass carried through the air. In the middle of it all was Marcus Hill, standing by his pool with a long aluminum skimmer in his hand. Marcus was a tall black man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered but soft-spoken, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and basketball shorts. His skin glistened in the rising sun as beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He hummed an old Marvin Gaye tune under his breath while guiding the net across the surface of the pool, scooping out a couple of leaves that had fallen overnight. To Marcus, this pool wasn't just a pool. It was a dream made real. He had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a landlord who never fixed the broken faucets. As a kid, Marcus used to sneak into hotel pools with his cousins, laughing as they splashed around until someone would come storming out, yelling at them that they didn't belong there. That sting of exclusion stayed with him. Owning a home with a pool now wasn't just about luxury. It was about dignity. It was proof that he did belong, that all his years of hard work meant something. He leaned on the pool pole for a moment, admiring the water. Crystal clear. Sunlight sparkled across the surface, breaking into diamonds with every ripple. The air smelled faintly of chlorine, mixed with the sweetness of a neighbor's barbecue already starting up down the street. This was peace. This was his peace. And then, a shadow fell across the fence. "Excuse me?" Marcus turned. On the other side of the fence stood Karen Matthews, the president of the HOA. Karen was the kind of woman who carried herself like she owned everything in sight. Mid-50s, sharp-featured, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and oversized sunglasses perched on her face. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like it was an extension of her body. And today, she wore one of those oversized floppy sun hats that screamed, "Wine Mom ready for battle." "Yes?" Marcus asked, already feeling his stomach tighten. He'd lived here long enough to know that Karen never came around with good news. Karen tilted her head with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus, hi. I wanted to talk to you about the 4th of July party tomorrow." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "Well," she said, tapping her clipboard like she was delivering some kind of decree. "Since the community pool is under renovation this year, the HOA has decided that we'll need to use your pool." For a moment, Marcus thought he misheard her. He blinked. "I'm sorry, my pool?" "Yes," Karen said as though it were the most natural request in the world. "Your backyard is centrally located. It's large enough, and frankly, everyone knows your pool is the nicest in the neighborhood. It just makes sense." Marcus put down the skimmer slowly. He studied her, trying to figure out if this was some kind of bad joke. "Karen, with all due respect, this is my private pool, not the HOA's." Karen waved her hand like his words were a fly buzzing in her ear. "Oh, come on. It's just one afternoon. You wouldn't even have to lift a finger. We'll bring the food, the decorations, everything. All you have to do is let us in." Marcus shook his head. "That's not gonna happen." Her smile faltered. "Why not?" Marcus folded his arms across his chest, his voice calm but firm. "Because it's mine. I paid for it. I maintain it. Nobody else helped me when I spent months getting this built. Nobody's out here in the heat with me when I'm cleaning it every week. And I didn't sign up to host 100 people in my backyard." Karen's sunglasses slipped low enough for him to catch the flash of irritation in her eyes. She pressed her lips together. "Marcus, this is a community. Sometimes you have to think about the greater good. Don't be selfish." He let out a dry laugh. Selfish? Karen, I worked for years to make this happen. When I was a kid, people used to tell me I didn't belong in their pools. And now you're telling me I have to hand mine over? No, not happening. The air hung heavy between them. The cicadas grew louder. Finally, Karen adjusted her clipboard and said coldly, "Well, if that's your attitude, then maybe I'll just have to bring this up with the board." Marcus didn't flinch. "Do what you gotta do." Karen gave him one last tight smile, the kind that hid more anger than it showed, and turned sharply on her heel. He watched her march down the sidewalk, phone already in her hand. Marcus stood by his pool for a long moment, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling. He knew this wasn't over. Karen Matthews wasn't the type to accept no. And deep down, Marcus had the sinking feeling that this pool, his sanctuary, was about to become ground zero for a war he never wanted. And sure enough, he was right. Because the very next morning, Karen came back. And this time, she wasn't alone. Marcus barely slept that night. He tossed and turned, replaying the conversation in his head. Karen's voice echoed, "Don't be selfish." He stared at the ceiling in the dark, the hum of his air conditioner doing little to drown out the knot forming in his stomach. He wasn't a man who liked conflict. He believed in keeping the peace, but he also believed in standing his ground when something was his. By 7 a.m. the next morning, Marcus was already out on his back patio, sipping a mug of coffee. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and pink, the kind of sunrise that usually calmed him. But today, the peace didn't stick. He felt the tension in his bones. And then he saw her, Karen, marching right up the sidewalk, clip-clop of her sandals echoing in the quiet morning. But she wasn't alone. Two other women trailed behind her, both carrying their own clipboards and wearing matching expressions of disapproval. They looked like a trio of suburban generals, ready for battle. Marcus sighed, setting his coffee down. He knew this was coming. The knock on the gate was sharp, almost like a command. "Marcus!" Karen's voice rang out. He opened the gate slowly, keeping his face calm. "Morning." Karen didn't waste time. "Marcus, I've spoken with the board, and we've unanimously agreed that it's in the best interest of the community that you allow us to use your pool for the 4th of July celebration." The other two women nodded in unison, like backup singers. One of them, tall, with tightly curled blonde hair, added, "It's only fair. Everyone contributes something. Some host food, some decorate. You have the space, so it makes sense." Marcus folded his arms. "Hold up. I didn't agree to that." Karen pursed her lips. "That's why we're here. To make you understand. This community thrives on cooperation. And frankly, Marcus, you haven't exactly been the most participatory neighbor." That one stung. Marcus had heard it before, always in subtle ways. He didn't attend every block party. He didn't join the wine and cheese nights or sit on the whole meetings where they argued about mailbox paint colors for hours. He worked long shifts as an IT consultant. By the time he got home, all he wanted was some quiet. But the way Karen said it, not the most participatory, carried an edge that said more than it seemed. He narrowed his eyes. "Karen, with all due respect, I pay my dues. I keep my property in shape. Nobody has ever had a complaint about me. That's participation enough." Karen's voice sharpened. "This isn't about dues. This is about community. And if you can't give back when we need it, then maybe you're not really interested in being a part of this neighborhood." The words hung heavy. Marcus clenched his jaw. He thought about his childhood, about being told, "You don't belong here," at places where his face didn't fit the picture people had in mind. And now, here he was again, a homeowner, a taxpayer, someone who had done everything right, being told he didn't belong, unless he gave up what was his. "No," he said firmly. "The answer is no. My pool is private. I'm not hosting 100 people. End of story." The silence that followed was thick, charged. Then Karen tilted her chin up, her voice dripping with disdain. "Well, if that's how you want to play it, Marcus, then you leave us no choice." "No choice?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but cold. "We'll have to file a compliance review. If the board agrees, there could be fines, possibly even restrictions, you know, for failure to comply with whole cooperation clauses. One of the women behind her chimed in, "We wouldn't want this to get messy. You've got such a nice house. It would be a shame for things to change." It was a threat, plain and simple. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he refused to let it show. "Do what you need to do. I know my rights. And you don't own this pool." Karen's smile returned, tight, fake, but victorious in her own mind. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel, her two shadows following close behind. They strutted down the sidewalk like they'd won something, their clipboards clutched like trophies. Marcus watched them go, fists clenched at his sides. The morning air felt heavier now, the sweetness of his coffee replaced with a bitter taste of anger. He knew they weren't bluffing. Karen and her little board could stir up trouble, and she seemed determined to make an example out of him. But Marcus wasn't a pushover. Not anymore. That afternoon, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. He pulled up the whole bylaws, scrolling through the endless PDF of rules, regulations, and fine print. He read carefully, line by line. There it was, cooperation clauses, vague language about reasonable requests in the interest of community events. But nothing, absolutely nothing, that said he had to hand over his private property. He smiled to himself. They wanted a fight? He was ready. As the day wore on, word spread. Neighbors started whispering. Some gave Marcus polite, sympathetic nods when they passed his driveway. Others avoided eye contact altogether. He knew how these things worked. Karen controlled the social temperature of the neighborhood. If she painted Marcus as selfish, he'd be the villain in their little suburban drama. But Marcus didn't care. He wasn't about to let anyone trample over what was his. By evening, the sky was streaked with orange and purple, fireflies beginning to flicker in the humid air. Marcus grilled some chicken on his patio, trying to shake off the tension. The sizzle of meat, the smell of spices, the crackle of charcoal, it usually calmed him. But tonight, his eyes kept drifting toward the fence, half expecting Karen to reappear. And then, she did. This time, she wasn't alone. But it wasn't her clipboard brigade. It was two uniformed police officers walking beside her. The sound of police radios crackling broke the quiet evening air. Marcus froze on his patio, tongs still in his hand, the smell of grilled chicken lingering in the air like an unfinished sentence. He stared at the gate where Karen stood, smug, arms crossed, with two uniformed officers at her side. The taller officer, a broad man with sunburned cheeks, stepped forward. "Sir, are you Marcus Hill?" Marcus set his tongs down on the patio table, his voice calm but steady. "Yeah, that's me. What seems to be the problem, officers?" Karen immediately jumped in, pointing a manicured finger toward Marcus's pool. "The problem is that Marcus here is refusing to let the community use his pool for our annual 4th of July celebration. It's creating unnecessary conflict in the neighborhood. I told him this was a matter for the HOA, and he's being completely uncooperative." The officer frowned slightly, glancing between Karen and Marcus. "Ma'am, that doesn't sound like a police matter." But Karen wasn't finished. She lowered her voice dramatically, like she was about to deliver a bombshell. "It's not just that. I'm also concerned about safety. There are children in this community. With the way he's acting, hostile, aggressive, I'm worried someone could get hurt. What if he lets his pool turn into a hazard?" Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest. Hostile, aggressive? He hadn't raised his voice once. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. He knew exactly what Karen was doing, twisting the narrative, painting him as a threat. It wasn't the first time in his life someone had tried to weaponize that image against him. The second officer, a younger woman with kind eyes, turned to Marcus. "Sir, can you tell us your side?" Marcus nodded. "Absolutely. This is my private property. I own this pool. I paid for it. I maintain it. And I've told the whole president here that I'm not hosting their party. That's all there is to it." Karen let out a sharp laugh. "See? Completely unreasonable. Everyone else contributes, but he thinks he's too good for the rest of us." Marcus clenched his jaw. But before he could respond, the younger officer cut in. Ma'am, again, this isn't a criminal matter. If this is an HOA dispute, you'll need to handle it through your association. Unless there's an actual safety violation, there's nothing we can do. Karen's face flushed red beneath her sun hat. She wasn't used to being told no, not by Marcus, not by the HOA, and certainly not by the police. But don't you see? She stammered. He's dividing the neighborhood. This is going to cause chaos tomorrow. We need unity, and he's being selfish. The taller officer sighed, clearly tired of the theatrics. Ma'am, we're not in the business of enforcing neighborhood parties. Unless you're telling me he's breaking a law, we're done here. Marcus bit back a smile, keeping his face neutral. He could see the fury building behind Karen's sunglasses. She wasn't just losing, she was losing publicly. And that, for someone like her, was intolerable. The officers exchanged a quick nod, then turned back toward the street. Sir, have a good evening. Ma'am, please keep this civil. And just like that, they were gone. Karen, however, stayed rooted in place, glaring at Marcus through the gate. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll regret embarrassing me like this. Marcus leaned casually against the fence, his voice low but steady. Karen, the only person embarrassing themselves here is you. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought she might actually explode. But instead, she spun on her heel and stormed down the sidewalk, her sandals slapping the pavement with angry precision. Marcus let out a long breath, his body finally relaxing. The chicken on the grill was overcooked now, but he didn't care. For the moment, he'd won. But deep down, he knew Karen wasn't done. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table again, laptop open. He scrolled through his emails, and there it was. An official message from the HOA board. Subject line: urgent, compliance issue. He clicked it open. The email was short, clipped, and formal. Mr. Hill, as a member of our community, you are required to participate in communal events when reasonably requested. Your refusal to provide your pool for the upcoming 4th of July celebration has been noted as non-compliance. Please be advised that failure to cooperate may result in fines, penalties, or further action as determined by the board. Marcus rubbed his temples. They were really going through with it. The next morning, whispers buzzed through the neighborhood like bees. As Marcus stepped outside to mow his lawn, he noticed 2 neighbors across the street watching him, murmuring to each other. Another neighbor gave him a cold nod, then quickly turned away. It was happening. The social isolation, the weapon Karen loved to use. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He fired off an email of his own, attaching screenshots of the HOA bylaws that made it clear. Nowhere did it say homeowners had to hand over their private property. He CC'd the entire board, making sure his words couldn't be twisted. Then he picked up his phone and called his cousin, James, a lawyer in Atlanta. Man, they're trying to bully me, Marcus explained. They're threatening fines if I don't let them use my pool. James chuckled on the other end. They don't have a leg to stand on. Let them try. Worst case scenario, we'll shut them down in court. You got rights, Marcus. Don't let them scare you. Hearing that steadied him. But Karen wasn't fighting with rules. She was fighting with perception. And in a close-knit suburban neighborhood, perception could be just as damaging. By the evening of July 3rd, Marcus sat on his patio again, staring at his pool. The water reflected the sunset in waves of orange and purple. He could hear laughter and chatter drifting from Karen's backyard 2 houses down. Her little planning committee, no doubt, working late to salvage their party. And then, over the hedge, he heard her voice, sharp and shrill. He thinks he's too good for us. Tomorrow, we'll show him. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't know what Karen was planning, but he knew it wasn't going to be pretty. Because if there was one thing Karen Matthews hated more than being told no, it was losing control. And she was about to make her boldest move yet. Marcus woke up that morning feeling an unusual heaviness in his chest. The sun was barely creeping over the rooftops, casting long, sharp shadows across his backyard. Normally, the sight of the sparkling blue water in his pool would calm him, maybe even make him smile. But today, as he stepped onto the patio and blinked against the morning light, his stomach dropped. Something was off. The pool, his sanctuary, looked different. It wasn't just the early morning glare. It was lower, much lower. The water line had dropped by nearly a foot overnight. "What the?" Marcus muttered under his breath, dropping the coffee cup he was holding. It clattered against the stone patio, spilling a little onto the tiles. He ran to the edge of the pool, gripping the edge, and looked more closely. Someone had tampered with it. His heart raced. At first, he thought maybe a pipe had burst, or the filtration system failed. But then he noticed the wet trail leading to the side gate. Footprints, small, deliberate, and unmistakably human. And then he saw it. A note, pinned to the fence with a thumbtack, in Karen's familiar tight handwriting. "Consider this a friendly warning. Cooperate, or next time it won't just be a note." Karen. Marcus's hands shook. His pool, his hard-earned peace, had been compromised. He felt a rush of anger and disbelief. She had trespassed. She had interfered with his property, and she had left a threat in writing. He stepped back, pacing, trying to process. The air felt heavier, the summer sun hotter, the humidity clinging like a second skin. His mind raced through every conversation he'd had with Karen, every polite refusal, every warning from the HOA. This wasn't just escalation. This was war. Marcus knew he had to act. But how? Calling the police again seemed pointless. The last time, Karen had already tried twisting the narrative, portraying him as hostile or uncooperative. The officers hadn't done anything. The HOA wasn't going to enforce anything that protected him. If anything, they'd side with Karen. He needed a plan. By mid-morning, Marcus had done something most neighbors would never dare. He walked over to the pump system in his backyard, turning valves and levers he had learned to operate when he built the pool. Slowly, deliberately, he began draining the pool. Not out of anger, not recklessly, out of strategy. If Karen wanted to use his pool for her party, then she wasn't going to get what she wanted. She could call the cops, call the HOA, even threaten him further. But this water, this pool, was his choice, and he had every right to control it. Water gushed from the drain into the grass, making muddy trails down the backyard slope. The sound was almost therapeutic, a rushing reminder that Marcus was reclaiming control. He worked quietly, methodically, feeling the power of doing something deliberate in the face of bullying. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen was already preparing for what she expected would be her triumph. Her 4th of July planning committee had been working tirelessly the night before, decorating with streamers and arranging tables. In her mind, this was going to be the party of the year, and Marcus's pool was going to be the centerpiece. That's when she noticed a strange, muddy trail leading away from Marcus's property, the sound of water rushing faintly in the distance. She frowned. Something wasn't right. Karen marched across the street, flanked by her 2 allies from the whole committee. "Marcus," she shouted. "What are you doing?" Marcus looked up from the pool, sweat on his brow, hands wet and muddy from operating the valves. "Morning, Karen." His voice was calm, almost serene, but it carried an unmistakable edge. "You can't do that," she cried, flailing her arms. "This is a community event. You can't just." Marcus held up a hand, cutting her off. "Watch me." He had made his decision. The water would drain, and she would have nothing to parade around at her so-called celebration. The message was clear. You don't get to bully me. You don't get to threaten me. And you sure as hell don't get to take what isn't yours. Karen's face went white with fury. Her carefully constructed facade of composure cracked. "This isn't over. You'll pay for this," she screamed. Marcus didn't respond. He continued to open the last valve, listening to the sound of water rushing out, feeling a strange, powerful satisfaction. The same officers who had visited yesterday looked at him and the drained pool. One shook his head. "Sir, technically, this is your property." You're allowed to manage it however you want. There's no law saying you have to host a party for your hoe. Karen gasped, disbelief written across her face. You can't just let him get away with this, she yelled. Marcus smiled faintly. Watch me, he said. It was a major turning point. The scales of power had shifted, at least for the moment. Karen's authority had been challenged, her bullying nullified, not by force, not by anger, but by Marcus standing his ground and asserting his rights. As the officers left, Marcus looked at his empty pool, the muddy puddles reflecting the sun. The water was gone, but what he felt in that moment was far more important. Respect, empowerment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he would not be bullied, intimidated, or coerced. But even as he celebrated this small victory, he knew one thing. Karen Matthews would not take this lying down. She would escalate. She would plan. She would strike back. And Marcus knew he had to be ready. The morning sun rose over the neighborhood like a spotlight, highlighting the tension in every yard, every driveway, every whispering conversation. Word had spread fast. Marcus Hill had drained his pool. Karen Matthews was fuming, and the hoe had entered a state of quiet panic. But for Marcus, this was only the beginning. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee, surveying his backyard. The pool was now a shallow puddle, muddy and half empty. But to him, it wasn't destruction, it was strategy. He had made his point, his property, his rules. Still, Marcus knew that Karen wasn't going to let this slide. She was the type who built campaigns around personal grudges. And if there was one thing Marcus had learned over the years, it was that someone like her would escalate until someone finally pushed back. By mid-morning, his phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from neighbors popped up, some in support, some curious, some critical. Did Karen really call the cops? One neighbor asked. He had every right, another replied. This is getting out of hand. Marcus ignored most of it, focusing on what mattered. Preparation. He started by calling his cousin, James, the lawyer. James, it's escalating faster than I thought. Karen's planning something big for the hoe. I can feel it. I need a plan, legally and strategically. James laughed lightly. Marcus, you're already ahead. You've got your rights solid. The cops on your side if needed, and the whole bylaw is backing you up. But if she's going to escalate publicly, document everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. You don't want any wiggle room for her. Marcus nodded, already formulating his approach. He spent the next hour setting up his phone on a tripod, aiming it at the backyard and the side fence where Karen usually appeared. He wanted evidence. He wanted control. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen had sent out messages to the whole group chat. Marcus is out of control. He's sabotaging the community. We need intervention immediately. But Marcus had a surprise for them. He posted a photo of his backyard on his own neighborhood social media page. The drain pool, the muddy puddles, with a caption, "Private property. Hope is not above individual rights. Let's respect boundaries." Comments exploded. Some sided with Marcus, applauding his courage. Others sided with Karen, frustrated at the perceived disruption. But the momentum had shifted. People were watching. People were talking. And Marcus was no longer just fighting Karen. He was showing the neighborhood that he wasn't going to be intimidated. Meanwhile, Karen's anger simmered. She couldn't let this go. She called an emergency home meeting, demanding that Marcus be cited for non-compliance. She recruited allies, neighbors who resented him for not participating in block parties or committee meetings. They brainstormed ways to force him to cooperate. Petitions, complaints, and even rumors about hazards in the backyard. Marcus, however, wasn't idle. He began talking to supportive neighbors, explaining the situation calmly, transparently. This isn't personal, he told them. I just want to protect my home and my rights. Everyone's welcome at community events, just not at the expense of someone else's property. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Several neighbors expressed support publicly, posting messages, talking to the whole board, and subtly undermining Karen's campaign. By mid-afternoon, Marcus realized he needed to anticipate Karen's next move. She was unpredictable, and her escalation could go beyond social pressure. She could involve more authorities, fabricate claims, or even stage a confrontation in his backyard. Marcus decided to prepare for all scenarios. He started clearing the backyard, making sure there were no hazards, no equipment she could claim was dangerous. He called his security system company to check the cameras and ensure recordings would be clear if needed. Every detail mattered. He also made a plan for direct confrontation, not aggression, but strategic responses. If Karen showed up again, he would remain calm, document everything, and assert his rights. He didn't want to be baited into anger because that would give her leverage. As evening approached, Karen made her move. She came back, this time with her clipboard brigade, some neighbors in tow, and a smirk that screamed, "I've got this." Marcus saw them approaching from his patio. He didn't panic. He stepped outside, hands relaxed at his sides, and greeted them calmly. "Morning, Karen," he said. His voice was steady, confident. Karen didn't waste time. "Marcus, we're here to discuss your outrageous behavior. Draining your pool? This is sabotage. You've humiliated the HOA, and now it's time to make things right." Marcus nodded. "I disagree. The pool is my private property. I drained it because I have the right to control it. You've called the cops, threatened fines, and tried to manipulate neighbors. This isn't about a party. It's about control." Karen's face turned red, but she pressed on. "Control? This is about community. If you don't cooperate, we can escalate legally. Fines, citations, even legal action. You don't want this to go further, Marcus." He stayed calm. "Go ahead. You don't have the right to force me to host a party on my property. You can file complaints, involve the board, call the police. Nothing changes my rights." Her allies whispered nervously. Some tried to side with her, but her confidence was cracking. Marcus could see the doubt spreading. The neighborhood was watching, and Karen's power was slipping. The tension was palpable. Marcus could feel it in the air. Every neighbor within earshot was watching. Even the kids on bikes had paused, staring from the sidewalk. The backyard, once just his private space, had become a stage for a showdown. And Marcus realized something important. This confrontation wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and refusing to be bullied. Every action, every word, every calm gesture reinforced the message. "You cannot intimidate me." Karen, sensing the shift, finally slammed her clipboard down. "This isn't over," she hissed, backing toward the gate. "You'll regret this." Marcus didn't flinch. "I doubt it." As she left, the air felt lighter, but he knew the next escalation was coming. Bigger, more public, and potentially explosive. By nightfall, Marcus sat on his patio, iced tea in hand, surveying the drained pool. He thought about the history of injustice he'd faced, the sneers, the doubts, the times he'd been told he didn't belong. And he realized this wasn't just a fight with Karen Matthews. It was a fight for self-respect, for asserting boundaries, for showing the community that dignity matters. He was ready for the next move. The 4th of July morning arrived with the usual fanfare. Fireworks vendors setting up, children running with small American flags, and neighbors preparing for the annual HOA celebration. But in Marcus Hill's backyard, the air was thick with tension, not patriotism. Marcus stepped outside, scanning the horizon. His pool remained empty, the muddy puddles reflecting the early sunlight like a battlefield. He had spent the previous evening preparing, making sure his security cameras were functioning. Evidence of every possible interaction was recorded, and that the backyard was safe and clear of hazards. Today, it wasn't just about a pool. It was about defending his dignity and standing up to a bully. At 10 a.m., the first sign of the storm appeared. Karen Matthews, sunglasses in place, clipboard in hand, marching down the sidewalk like she was leading a battalion. Behind her were the usual HOA committee members, some neighbors who had allied with her, and a few curious onlookers who had caught wind of the escalating feud. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood on his patio, hands on his hips, the embodiment of calm control. He had spent years building patience and strategy, and today all of it mattered. "Marcus," Karen shouted, her voice slicing through the morning air. "You think draining your pool will intimidate us? Think again." Marcus folded his arms. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone, Karen. I'm protecting what's mine. That's it." Karen smirked, clearly expecting the whole allies behind her to provide backup. "You're being selfish, reckless, and completely unreasonable. The community is watching." Marcus glanced around, and indeed, the neighborhood had gathered. From behind fences and along sidewalks, eyes were on him. Some nodded in support, others whispered with judgment. The stakes were high, social, emotional, and legal. And then came the first escalation. Karen raised her phone. "I'm calling the police." Again. Marcus's heart rate increased slightly, but he stayed calm. He didn't need anger. He had facts, evidence, and the law on his side. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, driving slowly up the street. They parked at the curb, stepping out to assess the situation. Karen immediately launched into a dramatic report, gesturing wildly toward the empty pool. "This man," she said, pointing at Marcus, "has destroyed the community's event. He drained his pool. He is sabotaging the neighborhood. You need to do something." The officers exchanged glances and then approached Marcus. One, the same taller officer from before, spoke first. "Sir, what's going on?" Marcus explained, clearly and calmly. "This is my private property. I drain my pool because I control it. I'm not required to host HOA events here. Everything you see is legal and within my rights." The younger female officer scanned the scene, taking in the empty pool, the muddy puddles, and the crowd. "Sir," she called, claiming a safety violation. "But I don't see anything unsafe here." Karen sputtered. "Unsafe?" "He's being hostile." Marcus's calm voice cut through the noise. "Officers, she has been harassing me, spreading false claims, and trying to push me into giving up my private property. I've documented everything. I'm prepared to provide evidence." The officers nodded. They were no longer on Karen's side. Facts were clear, and Marcus had the proof. One officer said quietly, "Ma'am, unless there's an actual crime, there's nothing we can do here." Karen's face turned red. "This isn't fair. He's manipulating the situation. You can't just let him get away with this." Marcus raised a hand, signaling calm. "I'm not manipulating, I'm exercising my rights. If you're upset about a party, that's not my responsibility." At that moment, a group of neighbors stepped forward. Some who had supported Marcus all along, some who had been skeptical, and even a few who had been neutral, but now saw the situation clearly. They spoke in unison, defending him, recounting the harassment, and confirming his version of events. Karen's authority began to crumble. Her smirk faltered, replaced by disbelief and fury. For the first time, she was publicly challenged, not by Marcus alone, but by an entire neighborhood witnessing her bullying tactics fall apart. The tension reached its peak as Karen, desperate, attempted to storm toward the empty pool, pointing at it like it was a crime scene. Marcus remained calm. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, and didn't give her the satisfaction of confrontation. He let the empty pool, the muddy mess, and his evidence speak for him. One of the officers finally intervened. "Ma'am, step back. You've had your say. There's no violation here. Any further action on your part may be considered harassment." Karen froze, realizing she was losing both control and credibility. The whole committee members began murmuring among themselves, some giving up and retreating. Her allies' faces reflected doubt, uncertainty, even embarrassment. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm power wash over him. This wasn't about anger, revenge, or drama. It was about asserting boundaries, defending rights, and standing tall in the face of intimidation. Suddenly, the crowd of neighbors began to cheer, small at first, then louder, louder still. It wasn't just support for Marcus. It was recognition of justice, dignity, and fairness. The energy shifted. Karen Matthews, once so confident, now looked like a defeated figure. her credibility destroyed in front of everyone she had tried to manipulate. Marcus glanced at the empty pool one last time. It wasn't perfect. The water was gone. Mud clung to the grass. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had reclaimed control of his life, his property, and his peace of mind. He turned to the crowd, voice strong but calm. This is my property. This is my choice. And no one, not even the HOA, not even someone like Karen Matthews, can take that away from me. The neighbors erupted into applause, some cheering, some clapping quietly in respect. Karen Matthews finally turned and walked away, her tail between her legs, muttering under her breath. Marcus remained on the patio, taking it all in. The 4th of July party would still happen in the neighborhood, somewhere else, without him. But he had won far more than a pool. He had won his dignity, his rights, and a reminder to himself and everyone watching, no bully could dictate his life. And as he sipped his iced tea, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the weight of victory settling in, Marcus knew one thing. This wasn't just about a pool. This was about standing up, taking action, and refusing to be intimidated, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The 4th of July sun was high in the sky, scorching the rooftops and illuminating a neighborhood that was still buzzing from the morning's dramatic showdown. Fireworks crackled faintly in the distance, but in Marcus Hill's backyard, there was no celebration, just the quiet hum of a sprinkling hose and the distant chatter of neighbors. The aftermath of the showdown with Karen Matthews was immediate and unmistakable. By mid-morning, word had spread through the neighborhood that Marcus had stood his ground and that Karen had publicly lost. What had started as a petty HOA dispute had escalated into a full-blown spectacle, and the ripple effects were only beginning. Neighbors began approaching Marcus one by one. Some were curious, others apologetic. A few had previously sided with Karen, but now sheepishly admitted they had been wrong. "Marcus," said Mrs. Peterson from down the street, clutching her hat against the summer sun, "I have to admit, I didn't see this coming. You really handled that well." Marcus smiled, nodding politely. "Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood boundaries. That's all." Across the street, Karen Matthews could be seen pacing, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice carried over the sidewalk, though muffled. From what Marcus could overhear, she was on a call with another HOA board member, likely attempting to salvage her reputation and rally support. But it was clear her influence had waned. Many of her allies had quietly retreated, realizing the neighborhood was watching and that her credibility had taken a serious hit. By noon, Marcus's phone buzzed again, multiple texts, notifications, and even a few calls. Some were neighbors expressing support, offering help with cleanup, or simply checking in to make sure he was okay. One message from a neighbor caught his eye. "We're proud of you. You stood up for yourself and showed that bullying won't win." That's rare. The words made Marcus pause. He wasn't looking for praise, but he realized in that moment that what he had done was bigger than himself. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a lesson to the neighborhood, a statement that intimidation, manipulation, and coercion had limits. Meanwhile, Karen Matthews' attempts to escalate legally were met with immediate pushback. Marcus had documented every interaction, every visit, every email, every voicemail, and his cousin James had prepared a solid legal response. When the whole board convened later that afternoon, the atmosphere was tense. Karen presented her complaints, waving her notes and recounting her side of the story with passion. But the board, faced with Marcus's documentation, the police reports, and the visible support of multiple neighbors, had little room to maneuver. One board member cleared her throat. "Karen, while your concerns are noted, it's clear that Mr. Hill acted within his rights. The property belongs to him, and the HOA cannot compel him to provide it for events." Karen's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to argue, but the room was silent. No one backed her up. Her allies exchanged nervous glances. It was over, at least officially. Marcus, who had been quiet during the proceedings, allowed himself a small smile. He didn't gloat. There was no need. The facts spoke louder than any words of victory. Back in the neighborhood, the 4th of July celebrations continued, just not in Marcus's backyard. Karen had moved her decorations to a nearby park and tried to salvage the event, but the energy was off. Whispers followed her everywhere. Some neighbors refused to participate, quietly boycotting her little party. Others stayed, but the tension was palpable. Karen's reputation, once polished and imposing, had been irreversibly dented. Marcus, on the other hand, spent the afternoon quietly cleaning up his backyard. The empty pool, now drained and muddy, was a reminder of the battle won, not just the water lost. As he raked leaves and swept debris, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in days. The confrontation had taken a toll, emotionally and physically, but it had also brought clarity. He realized that standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes, the quiet, calculated assertion of rights can be the most powerful statement of all. By evening, the neighborhood had mostly returned to normal. Children ran with sparklers, neighbors grilled hot dogs, and the distant sound of fireworks added a festive backdrop to an otherwise intense day. Marcus sat on his patio, a glass of iced tea in hand, watching the sky turn from orange to purple. He thought about Karen Matthews, pacing in her new park setup, probably still plotting some way to regain control. But he also thought about the other neighbors, those who had watched, learned, and perhaps taken a lesson in dignity and standing up against bullying. It was more than just a victory over one person. It was a shift in the social fabric of the community. Boundaries had been established. Respect had been earned. And Marcus knew this was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. That night, after the fireworks had ended and the neighborhood had quieted, Marcus sat alone on the patio. The air was cool now, the smell of charred hot dogs and fireworks lingering faintly. He reflected on everything that had happened, the tension, the confrontation, the draining of the pool, and the ultimate standoff. He realized something important. The real victory wasn't the empty pool. It was the empowerment that came with standing firm, the dignity of defending your rights, and the clarity that comes when you refuse to be intimidated. Marcus made a mental note to follow up with the whole board. Documentation, legal updates, and ongoing communication would be necessary to ensure Karen Matthews could not harass him or anyone else again. He also considered talking to neighbors formally, maybe hosting a small gathering to mend fences and strengthen community bonds, showing that one person's ego should never control an entire neighborhood. The night was quiet, the stars overhead reflecting in the shallow puddles of his pool. It had been a long day, emotionally exhausting, but victorious. Marcus Hill had faced intimidation, stood up to public pressure, and emerged not just intact, but stronger. And while Karen Matthews would undoubtedly continue plotting and whispering, her power over him had been broken. The days following the 4th of July were calmer, but not silent. In the wake of the dramatic showdown, the neighborhood felt different, charged with a mix of relief, curiosity, and lingering tension. Marcus Hill, once the target of Karen Matthews' relentless bullying, had emerged victorious. But as he discovered, victory wasn't just about winning a single confrontation. It was about repairing the social fabric, maintaining dignity, and managing the subtle, long-term consequences of standing up to a bully. Marcus started his day with a slow cup of coffee on the patio, watching the sun creep over the rooftops. His backyard, once a scene of chaos with a drained pool and muddy puddles, now felt calm, almost reclaimed. But he knew the battle for respect wasn't over. Neighborhood gossip had a long half-life, and Karen Matthews was not someone who gave up easily. Still, there was progress. A few neighbors stopped by that morning. Mr. Chen, a quiet retiree who had stayed neutral during the conflict, walked over with a small basket of pastries. "Morning, Marcus," he said cautiously. "I just wanted to say, well done. You handled yourself better than I could have imagined." Marcus smiled warmly. "Thanks, Mr. Chen. It wasn't easy, but I think it was necessary. The neighborhood needed to see that boundaries matter." Mr. Chen nodded, lingering for a moment before returning to his own house. That was the subtle power of resolution. Quiet, understated validation from those who mattered. Later that day, Marcus received an email from the whole board. Normally, Messages from that source carried a weight of bureaucracy and veiled threats. But this one was different. Mr. Hill, after reviewing all documentation and the events surrounding the July 4th confrontation, the whole board recognizes that your actions were within your legal rights and your property boundaries. While we encourage community participation, the board confirms that there is no obligation for you to provide your pool for HOA events. Thank you for your cooperation. Marcus exhaled, relief flooding his chest. The legal and official resolution had been achieved, and Karen Matthews' attempts to leverage the HOA for her agenda had failed. But Marcus wasn't content to simply let things sit. He reached out to neighbors individually, explaining the situation, clarifying misunderstandings, and offering ways to rebuild community trust. His approach was deliberate, not confrontational, but inclusive. "Hey, I know things got tense with the pool situation," Marcus said to one neighbor, Jasmine, as they passed on the street. "I just want everyone to know I value our community, but I also have to protect my space. I hope we can move forward without any hard feelings." Jasmine smiled, relieved. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus. Honestly, I think a lot of people were confused by Karen's claims. It helps to hear it straight from you." By mid-afternoon, Marcus decided it was time to address his backyard. The pool needed cleaning, the mud needed removal, and the space needed to feel like a sanctuary again. He rolled up his sleeves, put on gloves, and began the laborious process of restoring order. Neighbors watched curiously at first. Then some offered help. Mrs. Peterson brought cold water and snacks, a quiet gesture of solidarity. Mr. Chen offered a hose and some cleaning tools. Even Jasmine and her children pitched in, sweeping leaves and picking up debris. It was almost therapeutic. In the evening, Marcus decided to hold a small gathering. Nothing formal, just a few neighbors, iced tea, and casual conversation. The goal was simple: normalize interactions, show goodwill, and subtly demonstrate that he was a neighbor who respected both his rights and the community. Karen Matthews was, of course, not invited, but word spread, and the gathering drew a quiet group of supporters. Conversations flowed around shared stories, laughter, and even a few reflective discussions about the importance of respect and boundaries in the neighborhood. At one point, Marcus addressed the group, not with grandstanding, but with calm reflection. "I want to thank everyone for the support over the past few weeks," he said. "This wasn't about conflict. It was about showing that boundaries matter, and that respect is earned, not demanded. I hope we can all take something positive from this situation, that our community is stronger when we treat each other fairly." The neighbors nodded, smiles and nods confirming the sentiment. It wasn't dramatic or viral. It was meaningful. Marcus felt the weight of the conflict lifting, replaced by the quiet strength of resolution. As the sun set, Marcus walked through his backyard, now partially restored. The pool was clean, the grass trimmed, and the space felt calm again. He reflected on what had happened: the confrontation with Karen Matthews, the whole threats, the police visits, and the social pressure from the neighborhood. It had been exhausting emotionally and physically. But the secondary resolution, the subtle rebuilding of trust, the clarification of boundaries, and the quiet victory of dignity was just as important as the dramatic climax. Even Karen Matthews' influence had begun to wane. While she continued to whisper and complain to anyone who would listen, the neighborhood had seen the truth. Her manipulations no longer carried the weight they once had. Marcus's example of calm, deliberate action had shifted perceptions, proving that integrity and patience often speak louder than anger and aggression. By nightfall, the neighborhood was quiet. Marcus sat on the patio, glass of iced tea in hand, listening to the distant fireworks. He felt a sense of closure, not complete, because life in a neighborhood like this would always involve minor conflicts, but substantial. He knew the secondary resolution wasn't just about Karen or the HOA. It was about the broader lesson. Standing up for yourself doesn't have to create enemies. It can strengthen relationships, clarify boundaries, and leave a lasting impression of dignity and integrity. And as the final sparks of fireworks faded into the night sky, Marcus Hill felt a quiet satisfaction. He had won, not just a confrontation, but a moral victory that would echo throughout the community for months, maybe years. The days after the 4th of July showdown were quieter, but for Marcus Hill, the calm allowed time for reflection. He had faced Karen Matthews, resisted her bullying, and maintained his dignity in the face of social and institutional pressure. But beyond the immediate victory, Marcus began thinking about the lessons he had learned and the legacy he could leave behind for the neighborhood, and perhaps for anyone who might face similar challenges. Sitting on his patio one morning, a gentle breeze rustling the trees, Marcus considered the chain of events that had brought him here. The initial conflict had started small, a neighborhood HOA dispute over pool access, but it had spiraled into something much larger. At first, he felt anger, frustration, and even fear. Karen's aggressive tactics had left him uncertain, anxious, and second-guessing himself. Yet the very act of standing his ground, asserting his rights, and maintaining composure had shifted everything. He realized that the conflict wasn't just about a pool or an HOA rule. It was about respect, boundaries, and the courage to act when others sought to dominate or manipulate. Marcus reflected on how power operates in communities. People like Karen Matthews often rely on the assumption that others will stay silent, that intimidation, social pressure, or bureaucratic leverage will work without resistance. But when someone refuses to back down calmly and strategically, the power dynamics shift dramatically. Boundaries are invisible armor, Marcus thought. You don't need to yell or escalate. You just need to stand firm and be consistent. This lesson was one he wanted to share, not only with neighbors, but with anyone watching the story unfold, whether it was online or in real life. Marcus realized that personal empowerment is contagious. When one person models courage and dignity, it gives others permission to do the same. He also considered the role of the community. Some neighbors had remained neutral or even sided with Karen at first, hesitant to challenge her because they feared social backlash. But witnessing Marcus's steadfastness had changed the neighborhood. People who had been bystanders now had examples of how to respond to harassment or intimidation in constructive ways. It's not about confrontation for its own sake, he reflected. It's about showing that justice and respect can coexist. You can stand firm without creating enemies, and in doing so, you elevate everyone around you. Marcus recognized another key lesson. Documentation matters. Every photo, video, and written record had contributed to his success. Without evidence, he knew Karen could have twisted the story, using perception to her advantage. But by planning, recording, and preparing, he had protected himself and ensured the truth prevailed. Thinking further, Marcus considered the long-term legacy of the events. Karen Matthews' influence had waned. She would still complain, still whisper, still try to manipulate minor situations. But her credibility was permanently diminished. The community had witnessed what happens when intimidation is met with calm strength. Marcus realized that legacy isn't just about winning a single fight. It's about shaping the environment so that future conflicts are less about fear and more about fairness. Every neighbor who observed his actions, from Mrs. Peterson to the kids playing with sparklers, had absorbed a lesson in dignity, justice, and courage. He imagined future generations learning from this story. Children might grow up understanding that standing up for yourself isn't about anger or aggression. It's about calm determination, preparation, and asserting your rights respectfully. He pictured the ripple effect. A neighborhood with stronger boundaries, more empathy, and less tolerance for bullying behavior. Marcus also reflected personally. He realized how much the conflict had tested his patience, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking. He had learned to manage fear, navigate social tension, and maintain composure under pressure, skills that extended beyond a single HOA dispute. "I'm stronger than I thought," he admitted quietly to himself, "and I can face challenges without compromising my values." This self-awareness was empowering. Marcus knew that Karen Matthews, or someone like her, might resurface in another form. But now, he was prepared. He understood the tools of power, the importance of documentation, and the need for calm, deliberate action. He felt ready for whatever life might throw at him next. Marcus also began to share the story with neighbors in casual conversations, emphasizing the broader lessons rather than the drama. He spoke about the importance of standing up for yourself, documenting conflict,